You've heard the conventional view. Now prepare yourself to hear the other side. High school teachers Mike Margison and Justin Spears bring you the alternative view you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are, Margison, and Spears.
That's right. We are live, local, and late breaking. Traffic and weather together on the 8s with you morning, afternoon, and evening. We are live today, a midday episode of The Other Side, riding solo today. One half of The Other Side is with you, Mr. Justin Spears here on a Wednesday afternoon. The schedule's been pretty crazy lately, finishing up school and everybody hitting the vacation, summertime and everything. So we got to get these in when we can get them in. And my week allowed for me to have some time this afternoon to get this in. And I wanted to make sure that I got it in before we got too far along here in the week. Mike is on vacation this week with his family, so decided to get this episode in here on my own. Before we get into the episode, as always, contact information, a myriad of different ways that you can hear the program, contact us. You can reach us on Facebook, The Other Side Podcast. You can reach me personally, Justin Spears. You can find me on Facebook. We are on Twitter. I'm at Justin Spears 4. Mike is at Mr. Margison. You can contact us through our email, Margison and Spears. That's MARGESON and Spears, all one word, at gmail.com. You can catch this show in a variety of formats. You can watch it on our YouTube channel. Please give us a like and a subscribe there. That would be fantastic. We'd really appreciate that. You can catch us Saturday mornings if you're in West Central Indiana on 92.1 FM, 1550 AM WCVL. That's out of Crawfordsville. We appreciate the fine folks over there for supporting our show, or you can listen online at WCVLAM.com. Again, that's Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. You can catch the show on iTunes, on the Spreaker radio app, Google Play Podcasts, and last but not least, we appreciate and enjoy our network through the Cerberus Radio Network, and then putting our show on Monday through Saturday at 9 p.m. You'll hear replays of our archived shows. And the Cerberus Radio Network has some fantastic programming. Suzanne Sherman, Dan Bailey, Jeff Johnson. You can check out the Cerberus Radio Network YouTube channel page to find all of those great shows on there as well. So having gotten all that out of the way, let's get into the topic for today. And as you've hopefully noticed in the theme of our shows here recently, we've tried to go to a little bit more current event format. Mike and I had a discussion. We just kind of thought that going through and presenting the other side and the historical perspective on what's going on, current events might help be a little bit more relatable to a larger audience. And hopefully, again, as you hear the show, one of the best things you can do is spread the word, share it, give us comment, like, all that. But one of the things that we were hoping to do was to be able to appeal to a wider audience, and being able to present current event-based topics we thought would do that, again, while also talking about, the historical, governmental, financial, economic side of things, and then talking about, the opposite of what you're going to get through, whether it be textbook or just kind of the standard narrative on these issues. So today, what I thought I would do is I came across a Facebook post earlier this week that kind of made me pause and think, and I thought that would be a really good topic to discuss and talk about. And I expanded it out a little bit more, and it was a infographic on the war on drugs. And it was just kind of making some comments about all the different agencies and amounts of money that are spent fighting the war on drugs, and went into some deeper things related to the marijuana decentralization that we've seen here, and just kind of understanding, what is the Trump administration going to do with this? Are they going to federally start enforcing criminalization of it, or is it just going to be left to the state and local level as it should be? So I thought I want to put together an episode where we really examine and talk about the war on the three big ones, right? Drugs, as I just talked about, terror, and poverty. And so I'm going to kind of run through these, give a little bit of credence to each of them. And the theme that I want to kind of focus on here as we talk about this are I want you to think about, as you hear this, the role of the government in these things, how successful, in other words, what have the results been with it? And then finally, okay, if we don't want the government involved in these things, what alternatives do we have, right? And that's what we're going to be building toward and working to kind of give you a sneak peek as to what the payoff is going to be here with this. So let's kind of start a little bit here with an understanding of, why these things even exist. Why is there a war on poverty, a war on drugs, a war on terror? And I think we have to come to the table and understand that as the government has grown over the history of this country, there's been no doubt that going back, I'll just for simplicity's sake, use the Great Depression as a starting point. I know this happened well before then. I don't want to get into all that though, but certainly with the Great Depression, people started looking to the government for solutions to things. They started to look to the government to become more active, to provide them with things, right? So there's hardship. We need the government to come in. Great Depression comes along. We need the government to pull us out of this. And so that mindset that starts to creep into the American public then kind of moves forward into what we see with these three that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to kind of take them a little bit loosely in historical order, although you could make arguments here that some of these predate others. But that kind of is the sense here, right? Is that, we've got a problem in society. Where's the solution going to come from? And unfortunately, increasingly, more and more people were looking to rely on the government as that solution provider. So I'll even give you the benefit of the doubt. If you're in that camp, if you're one that thinks that the government has the tools and it's equipped to be able to provide solutions to these types of problems that we have in society, I think the thing that we have to then say is still, giving that benefit of the doubt is, okay, well, what has been, right, the return on investment? Where's the payoff to this? Where are the results to this? As they used to say, where's the beef? Show me the money. Show me the results of having the government involved in these things. And I think as we examine these, we'll see, and it will be my goal to prove that they aren't there. There aren't any. There are no results other than lost time, lost money, and really having spun our wheels. So let's get into this. That kind of gives you hopefully a little bit of a background as to where we're going with this. Let's talk a little bit first and foremost about the war on poverty. And again, timeline-wise, I'm going to start with LBJ in January of '64, his State of the Union address. He, as part of his Great Society, rolls out based off of the fact that the poverty rate has hit 19% in this country. Now, I want to pause for just a second. If I had more time, I would go in and talk a lot more about defining poverty, relative, absolute, extreme. I don't want to get into all that today just for the simple fact that I don't have the time to do it. So I'm not going to provide a hard, fast rule on how we define poverty. I think commonly what is looked at here in the United States is, basic minimum wage, income levels, those kinds of ideas that float around in people's mind when they think about poverty, not necessarily defining $1 a day or $1.25 a day or what have you. But I'll go with the numbers that the government provided, and that's what they provided, was that this so-called poverty rate had hit 19%. And so, again, whether you think that warrants the government getting involved in this or not, we'll just go ahead and, for the sake of argument, say, okay, let's say that it did. Well, what has it got us? 50 years on, back in 2014, we celebrated the 50-year anniversary of the quote-unquote war on poverty. And what we have seen is, in that 50-year period of time, $22 trillion spent. That's a lot of money, right? And I guess it's worth defining too here, what these what this money has gone towards is programs, obviously, for housing, for economic development in communities, for job growth and opportunity for people. Obviously, got Medicaid, Medicare, social programs that the government provides, welfare assistance, things of that nature. $22 trillion spent. In 2013, 1 year prior to the 50-year anniversary of this, the poverty rate was shown to be at 14.5%. Now, again, I'm not great with math, but I can see that that is only about a 5% reduction in the poverty level over that 49-year period of time, a $22 trillion investment to bring the poverty rate down 5%. Now, again, I'm not minimizing the numbers in regards to, obviously that's a lot of raw numbers. But I think if, as with anything that you would look at in your life, if you're going to invest that amount of time and money and people into something, I would think that you would probably expect a little bit better results than that. The other thing that we have to look at too is who has this affected, right? When we think of poverty in America today, I think generally speaking, most people would immediately jump to urban environments, inner cities where you drive through and you see dilapidated buildings, hollowed out factories, things like that. But really what LBJ's poverty program was targeted toward was rural areas like Appalachia, where you had a lot of extreme poverty happening, and still to this day do. And one of the things that I find kind of fascinating, I was reading a New York Times piece that was written a number of years ago on McDowell County, West Virginia, where they went in and they said, this is kind of the heart of Appalachia. And they said, 50 years on, we're still seeing poverty. And in fact, it's on the rise because places like this have been forgotten. They've been left in the wake of all of the money being thrown toward the urban environments and revitalizing neighborhoods and rejuvenating, certain parts of inner city America. And you have these very, very rural, poor parts of the country still that are suffering. And the thing that I found fascinating about it altogether is the other component to government being involved in this is that obviously the government has taken on a much greater role in central economic planning. And when you look at and it doesn't matter Republican or Democrat, when you look at the government's role in this, they have really, from an economic perspective, crippled areas like this. For example, obviously what I'm referring to here is coal country, right? Where you see all the regulations placed on the coal industry and the move away from coal to more alternative fuels and energies and things of that nature. And so it's kind of a double whammy. Not only are the dollars being invested into these programs not helping those who are in need in these areas, the economic policies are crippling these areas as well. And so that makes for a pretty devastating situation where you kind of start to see this ripple effect, right? That the economy suffers. There's no investment into the community, no tax dollars, no government programs such as education. The education levels of completion of graduation rates and things of that nature in these parts of the country are awful as well. So it really kind of is all tied in there. But I think that's what, to me, when we look at this, and I found it really interesting. I was reading back through as I was preparing for this episode here this week. Milton Friedman had a fantastic series I've referenced before in some of our other episodes called Free to Choose. It was on PBS. And he talked about this idea of government welfare programs and how really what they do is they perpetuate poverty, right? They get you onto these programs where you get housing assistance or unemployment checks or welfare in any form. And what they do is they keep you, they hook you in on them, and they penalize you if you try to advance forward and move on with your life. You got to take a risk. You got to take a chance. Maybe you go and you get a job that you're not sure if it's something that's going to be around for a while, or if you're going to lose it pretty quickly, or what's going to happen. But a lot of people will decide not to take that job because guess what? Once you take that job, you lose those benefits. And if you take the risk of getting a job, you lose your government benefits. If the job doesn't pan out, if you're laid off, if it ends up being something that you don't want to do or can't do, whatever the circumstance are, now you're back to square one, and you're in an even worse situation than you were in before. So these government programs that are guised as being, beneficial to those who are in need really just kind of help, keep that cycle of poverty going there. So again, I think the end thing that we've got to look at here is $22 trillion. Now, over 50 years in, where are we today? Are we in any better situation? I think the answer clearly is no. And I want to also, let me say here too, there's going to be some level of poverty in any economic environment. I know that we obviously are proponents of the free market and capitalism. And I know it takes a lot of heat from those on the left about, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, the income inequality that exists, things of that nature. Again, if I had more time, we could go through the statistics of what capitalism has done for the common person in this country and others that promote capitalist ideas. Unfortunately, again, I don't have the time to go through all that today, but suffice it to say that I think this system of economics and its track record have proven that it provides the greatest opportunity, again, for the common person. And so getting the government more involved certainly is not going to help, as we've seen there. So we're going to come back and talk about some solutions to that here in just a moment. The next one I want to talk about here briefly is the war on drugs. And again, the reason that I say briefly here is that this is one that I could probably dedicate an entire show toward, especially if I wanted to go all the way back into like prohibition and opium and things of that nature. But again, here I'm going to kind of pick up with this with Nixon. And again, I know the common misconception here with this, guys, is that, the Democrats are the ones that use the big government to push these programs. LBJ, Kennedy, these guys were Democrats. Democrats love these big government programs. But in all fairness and honesty, Republicans love them too. Nixon and Reagan in particular were two that in the war on drugs used the power of government to try to achieve an outcome that they desired. And so we can't let them off the hook, right? I mean, you normally think of Reagan, you think of limited government, small government. I mean, he, used that famous line, the worst words to hear or whatever, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But, again, Reagan found it adequate to use the government to fight this war on drugs, and kind of started with Nixon back in June of 71. Nixon kind of was in a tough spot where there was the rise of anti-government sentiment in the country, and anything that he tried to put forward where the government was even trying to remotely do something positive here, it was going to be met with resistance. And he declared this war on drugs public enemy number one, right? Creates the DEA in 73. And again, with all these programs and the use of the FBI and everything as well, the firearms, tobacco, and every alcohol, firearms, tobacco, ATF, and everything. The question that we have to ask ourselves here is, okay, government getting involved in trying to help alleviate a public nuisance or issue in society. Again, even if we give you the benefit of the doubt and say, all right, I'll allow it, I'll listen to what you have to say, what have the results been? $75 million was the original budget for the DEA back in 1973. As of today, the annual budget runs just north of $2 billion, right? So from 75 million to 2 billion, again, we want to ask, what is that ROI? What is that return on investment? How are we seeing a decrease in drug activity in our country? And I know people will cite statistics about certain drug usages being down across the board and things of that nature. But again, it's still an issue in society today where we have government actively out policing and trying to enforce policies to rid communities of drugs. Obviously in the 80s, you had the crack cocaine epidemic. Today, the issue is, obviously meth, heroin. We've got these unfortunate ODs in our communities. And again, this is a rural and urban issue now where you're seeing, all kinds of horrific stories of parents ODing in cars, people ODing in public. It is sad. And again, I think if you go and you say, okay, but what is the government getting involved? How is that helping? How is the government helping to stop people? And again, I can't tell you that they haven't. I can't tell you that there hasn't been a government program that has saved a person's life or kept somebody from going down the wrong path. That's not my intention. I'm talking bigger picture here. I'm talking about when you look at the raw amount of money that's being spent, and don't let this slide by either. The amount of people, right? The amount of people that are involved in this, that are a part of these agencies, human capital that we have to dedicate to this program. These are people that could be engineers, they could be working in other career fields, but we need people to be able to go out and enforce these laws. And really what you see is, like a prime example with this marijuana issue, we can't even enforce the laws that are on the books. The federal government does not have the resources to be able to go through and enforce the laws that are on the books. And that's not even talk about whether or not they should have the authority to do that. Again, that's just saying, okay, the federal government has criminalized marijuana, enforce it. And they can't. They can't do it. They don't have the resources. They would need even more beyond what they have right now, which is just, to me, unfathomable. So when you think about, again, the return on the investment, I think beyond just the raw dollars that are spent, the epidemics that we see still, that clearly is a disconnect. But you also have to look at the criminal justice system. How fair are drug laws? And you can find all kinds of data and information out there about how discriminatory these policies and everything are towards minorities. And it's just unfortunate to see, again, the government not efficient, the government not being able to provide a solution to a problem here. And the war on drugs certainly is a prime example of that. So I want to transition here finally into the last war that in my lifetime, I have kind of seen the evolution of, and that's the war on terror. Obviously, post 9/11, what has this looked like here? And I'll tell you what, guys, I'm not even going to talk about the military side of this. I'm not going to talk about the billions, the trillions of dollars that have been spent on needless interventions in the Middle East, where you can't tell me that we haven't wasted the human lives, the money, the time. We've destroyed countries and communities over there. I don't even have time to really go into all that in detail. I want to talk about here domestically, right? Just like I have with the war on poverty and the war on drugs. What does this look like? Well, you've got the creation of, at post 9/11, of Homeland Security, which was one of the biggest reconsolidations, reorganizations of the federal government since the creation of the Department of Defense. You've got agencies like the TSA and FEMA. And you know what? You hear, again, Republican and Democrat, Obama, Trump, Bush, all of them. They all get up there and talk about, and you can go online and see this. Just Google Homeland Security accomplishments. I did earlier this week, and it was difficult to find anything that was straightforward in showing what the Department of Homeland Security has accomplished. What has it done to help keep this country safe? Again, $40.6 billion budget in this agency, in this department, with 240,000 employees, right? And again, you know, when you look at this and you say, okay, that's a lot of people, that's a lot of money, where are the results of it? Can you really point to anything concrete that says this is what this has done for us? This is how it's kept us safer. You know, this is how it has rooted out certain ideologies or prevented these incidents from happening. I mean, you've had Boston, you've had the San Bernardino shootings, you've had all kinds of different events, whether you want to categorize them as terror or not, the Pulse nightclub shooting, you know, so on and so forth. The bottom line is that I can't think of any concrete example of where the Department of Homeland Security can look at the American people and say, this is what we've done Here's the dollars that you as a taxpayer have invested. Here's what we've done to keep you safer. Here's how we're helping fight this so-called war on terror. And again, when you look at just the two other agencies within the department that I talked about, TSA and FEMA, TSA is a disaster. I mean, you don't have to go far at all to look at different stories of how just above and beyond the line they have encroached on the privacy of, you know, the strip searches and the x-ray screenings and just patting down grandmas and grandpas in airports and just generally making flying miserable. FEMA has been just an unfettered disaster where you look at different events and their reactions and responses. Obviously, you got Katrina and other events where they were scrutinized pretty heavily for their lack of response and organization. And of course, then there's the endless investigations and internal investigations that have been looked at with these. The Department of Veterans Affairs, you know, with what's gone on with our vets, it's an absolute disaster. And you hear these politicians talk about, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and nothing ever concrete comes out of this. It's just more of the same. So again, I want to echo and try to get you to think about not the smoke and mirrors that they'll present as to why they're so needed, why they're so important, but what has that return on investment been? And with all of these, guys, I hope that you're sensing and seeing this theme. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on terror. When you look and read in retrospect, the one common thing that you'll see in all of those, public support has waned. People are tired of the federal government mismanaging, abusing, inefficiency, ineffectiveness with these programs. I hope and pray that the tide is turning. And I hope and pray. Unfortunately, I see signs that talk about how among millennials there is an increasing support for socialist programs, that people will wake up and say, the government is not the solution. And again, guys, this isn't even to talk about the constitutionality of any of this. This is just from a common sense perspective. This is just from, again, I'm granting you the premise that government is involved with these. I'm talking about looking at the results. And that in and of itself should be enough to say, time out. We need to reevaluate this in a serious manner, not platitudes, not commissions, not, hey, we're going to create this 300-page report and then it's going to sit on a shelf somewhere and we're going to pat ourselves on the back and say we audited or we did this. We need real action and solution to getting the government out of these things. So to wrap it up in the last couple of minutes here, you might be saying, okay, Spears, you've clearly said, and it's obvious that you're not in favor of the federal government being engaged in these, but there are problems. They're not going to go away just because the government gets out of them. We're still going to have poverty. We're going to still have drug issues. We're still going to have to contend with terror. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But here's the thing. Where does the solution come from? The best solution comes from the private market. Now, before you get all bent out of shape and there you start going on with your private enterprise, you just want to make a quick buck off of this. You want some rich donor to create some agency and just profit off of somebody else's tragedy and misery and poverty. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is private in that you and I are the solution bearers here. You and I are the ones that need to look in the mirror. And we need to get together in our communities. We need to get together in our neighborhoods, our towns, our townships, our counties, our municipalities, whatever government organization you live under. We need to start coming together. We need to turn the TV off, put the Facebook down, put the Twitter down, quit being so divided on all of these things. We need to get together in town hall meetings across this country and put our differences to the side, whether they be religious, whether they be racial, whether they be gender, whether they be socioeconomic. And we need to say, here is what we are going to do locally. People coming together in communities, helping each other out. Food banks, Habitat for Humanity, food pantries, just community policing, all of these different things that can be done to help fight these problems that exist. They're real. I'm not trying to minimize them in any way, shape, or form, but we need to come together and we need to look at these issues and say, we've got to stop waiting for the government to show up and solve this problem because, gang, it's not going to happen. It's going to start with us coming together, working together, putting our differences to the side, and treating each other like humans and treating those in need like human and giving them an opportunity to advance in their life no matter where they're at, no matter if they're struggling with poverty or drugs or education or whatever it might be, or they're caught up in a life of crime, whatever it might be. We have to pull ourselves together. And that's where the solution is going to come from. And whatever system that looks like, that might be that you create a community foundation and a fund and you work it out that way, or it might just be a couple of families getting together and saying, we're starting a support group in our church, in our home, in our town hall, in our community center, in our park, whatever it might be. It's going to have to start with somebody throwing a pebble into the lake, but that will ripple out. And eventually you'll have enough people to throw a boulder into that lake and it will eradicate the problems. Again, that's our solution. That's the other side. That's what you're not going to hear by tuning into the nightly news. You're going to hear about how the government is going to have to step in and solve these problems. But if you haven't caught on, guys, it's not going to happen. The government has a track record, and that track record is one of failure. The question is, how much longer are we going to put up with that before we say enough is enough? So that's our episode for the day. Hopefully that gives you some food for thought, some things to think about. Again, I always appreciate you guys tuning in to the other side. Again, please help give us a like, a subscribe, a share, a comment. We're always continuing to look for input from our listeners. If there's anything that you have for us that you can suggest, we'd really appreciate it. And until next week, you have now heard The Other Side.
Thanks for listening. And remember, you're not fully informed until you've heard The Other Side.